Hello, and welcome to Cthulhu Flashdance Reviews. My name is Greg, and this is my review of Monsters vs. Heroes, a Cthulhu Mythos Edition by Enrique Dunas. Apologies, Enrique, if I mispronounced your name in any way. In Monsters vs. Heroes Cthulhu Mythos Edition, you're choosing to play whether as heroes or monsters from Shadows over Innsmouth or At the Mountains of Madness. If you're playing with 4 players, you choose one of those stories, and basically your objective is to try to get the most points and figure out who's on your team and who's not on your team. If you are playing with up to 8 players and you want to combine the 2 stories together, heroes are trying to basically identify each other, and the monsters are trying to identify each other, and you're trying to play cards in order to get the most points, and also potentially get some heroes or monsters in front of you as part of your objective based on which identity you have. Let's take a look at how the game plays. In a game of Monsters vs. Heroes Cthulhu Mythos Edition, you will have 2 decks of cards that will come in the box. One of the deck of cards has a mountain icon in the bottom right, which represents the Mountains of Madness characters. The other one will have a basically a monster in the bottom right. And this represents the Shadows over Innsmouth expansion. And so since you're playing characters from those stories, if you're playing with up to 4 players, you want to use ideally 1 deck. Unless you want a longer game, then you can use 2 decks. If you are playing with up to 8 players, then you want to use 2 different decks because then you have more cards to pass out, Monsters vs. Heroes, and it's a little bit of a more strategic game. There's more cards to play, and the game will last about 20 minutes overall. At the beginning of the game, if you're playing with 4 players, you would shuffle these roll cards, hidden identity roll cards, basically. So you give those a good mix together, and then you'd pass them out to the 4 players at the table, or 3 players, or 2 players. I will say that there are special rules for playing this game with 2 players, but in my opinion, you need 3 or more to play the game. So I'm going to show you a 4-player example. And then once all the cards have been dealt, everybody will look at their cards secretly and will see whether they are on the monster side or the hero side. And as you can see in this game, there was 3 heroes and 1 monster. However, because there are 6 cards and there's an equal number of monsters and heroes, you could easily get one game where you have 3 monsters, or you can have all 4 people play monsters, or you can have one person be on the monster side and the rest on the hero side, and vice versa. And so there's definitely a lot of replayability in that sense, and there's still a lot of unpredictability about whether or not there are heroes or monsters in the game. Now, of course, if you wanted to make a more balanced experience where it's guaranteed to be 50-50, for example, well, you could take 4 cards and just shuffle them together and pass them out, but playing in with all 6 randomly adds a little bit more mystery to the game. Once you have figured out your identity and read the cards will have 3 pieces of information on them. Again, it'll have a symbol at the bottom, mountain or monster, to indicate which story this particular card is for. And this one is a hero card, but also I know it's a little hard to see on the camera, but there is some text that is basically the characters you need to get. So, for example, with this hero card, you want to get Danforth and Professor Lake. With this monster card, you want to get Elder One and the Star Spawn. With this one, you're trying to get Frank H. Perdue and Professor Lake. And with this card, you're trying to get Danforth and Frank H. Perdue. So there are some disadvantages for having multiple heroes in the game versus just a monster. But at the end of the day, you're trying to get these 2 cards in front of you so that you can get an extra 2 points. So in this example, it would be impossible to get 6 points because the heroes all have the same, creatures that they need to get, but you can get a bonus 2 by getting one of the heroes having all the cards that they need. And a monster player basically gets 2 skulls, essentially 2 points, if they get the Elder One and the Star Spawn in front of them. Then to start the game, once everyone has their secret identity, you would take the deck of cards that are part of the story that you're playing, and you give them a good shuffle. I already shuffled these cards in order to save time, but basically give it a good shuffle, and then you would put it in the center of the pile. Once you have it in the center, you would flip over the first card just to create a discard pile, and then you would pass out or have everyone draw 3 cards. Once everybody has their starting hand of 3 cards, you're ready to begin to play the game. Now the game, the way it works is you go around the table and basically play cards from your hand or draw a card. You can only do one of those 2 actions every turn. So on your hand, you would take a look at your cards, obviously. And as you can see from the cards, they have, they're basically a symbol in the upper left-hand corner, as you can see on this card. And this card, which is a monster card, has a skull icon in the upper left-hand corner. They also have some text down here that does their actions, and of course they have some flavor text and color and image. And so on your turn, when you have your 3 cards in your hand, you look at them and you can decide, okay, do I want to play a card in front of me? Do I want to play a card in front of another player? Or do I want to draw a card? Once the deck runs out, the game immediately ends. And so in this case, since I'm a hero player that needs to get Danworth and Professor Lake, which I have Professor Lake in my hand, I might save this card to the very end of the game so that no one can steal it from me. But as like some of these cards, like for example, the color out of space says you may discard from the table as many horrifying hieroglyph cards as you want. Professor Lake says put all the horrifying hieroglyphs from a player's area into your own area. And Frank H. Perdue says take a card from the hand of a player to your left that you may either discard it or put it on the top of the deck. And so this way, the game is going to go clockwise, but this way you can basically manipulate other people's piles, manipulate your own pile, or basically put more cards on the top of the deck so that people, you know what's coming up, and you know, and nobody else does, except for your player on the left who is going next. But you now know what that player's card is going to be if they draw. So there's other cards in the game, like the Yeti card, for example, that will discard a card from the area on the player on your left, except for the horrifying hieroglyph, but is also worth points. There's the Goose, which is worth 2 hero points at the end of the game. Move as many heroes as you want from a player's area to another area of your choice. And things like the Valiant Expeditioner. You may discard monsters from the table, except a Yeti, the Shoggoth, and the Shrouded One. So some cards will discard cards except for some. Some cards will discard all cards or move them around the table. And also, there are ones in the deck that are like the Albino Penguin that moves a card from your area to another player's left, but it does keep certain cards in front of you, like the Albino Penguin, a Sled Dog, or a William Dyer card. So that might be a way to kind of move cards around and keep people guessing what identity you are while also getting points for your side. And then, like, for example, at the end, you know, maybe near the end of the game, you're like, oh, I have a Shrouded One card. This card is worth 2 monster points, and it discards all hero cards from your pile. So you may, in the beginning of the game, like removing all the hero cards to your pile to make it look like you're part of the hero side when you're really part of the monster side. And then you're going to go, boom, I play the Shrouded One, discard all the heroes, and in my own area, and now I have 2 points towards the monsters. The hieroglyphs one, the horrifying hieroglyph that we mentioned before, is a really powerful card that basically what it does, and this is why as a hero you may want this card in your pile, or a monster, because it's not worth any hero or monster points. But instead, if you have more cards on your pile than the player to your left, your player to your right, you'll gain +1 point. If you have less cards than the player to your right, then you will have -1 point. So at the very end of the game, if you're like getting really close, you're like, I have more cards already than the player on my right. There's 1 more card left in the deck, so as soon as that card is drawn, it's going to be basically the end of the game. There's not really a lot of hero points on the table, so I might play the Professor Lake card in front of me, despite the fact that the hero's needed, because this would get all the hieroglyph cards from the table and put it in my pile, which also increases my pile and will give me +1 point for each of those cards at the very end of the game. And then once the last card in the deck is drawn, it doesn't have to be played. It doesn't have to be shown. You just draw it. It immediately ends the game. You tally up all the points in front of you. So you would look at basically, let's say these 4 cards are in this guy's pile. This guy has these 3 cards in their pile. This player has these 4 cards in their pile. And these guy has 3 cards in his pile, and then you have the cards in your hand. You know, the rest of the cards are in people's hands. You would then look at the table. You would tally up all the skulls that you've got. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 skulls so far on the table. And then the shrouded one would also be another 2, so that's 8 skulls. And then the monster player would look at his hand and see, do I have the Elder one and the Star Spawn? I do not. So that's those points. And then with the horrifying hero glyph card, they would look to the player on their right, see that the player only has 3 cards. They have 4 cards, more cards, I mean. And since they're the monster player, that gives them an extra point. And then you look at all the hero cards, see how many hero cards there are. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hero points. Then you look at this guy's hero glyph card, and it says he looks at the player on his right. Does he have more cards? He does, so he gets an extra point. So that's 11 cards. Then you look at the hero characters. He does not have he has Professor Lake, but not Danforth. So nobody else has Danforth or Professor Lake in their piles. Nobody gets +2 points. And then you would tally it up and say you have 10 monster points and you got 11 hero points, then the heroes win. And that's the end of the game. And then you're able to basically rinse and repeat and play again if you want to. So now we'll move on to my overall opinion of the game. That is how you play Monsters vs. Heroes, Cthulhu Mythos Edition. This particular edition is the second game in the Monsters vs. Heroes series. I haven't played the other ones yet, but overall I felt this game was pretty fun. It's a very simple game, similar to like Flux, where the game is based on the cards that you play that dictates basically the interactions you're going to have, and overall determines at the very end who is the winner. I gave it about a 7 out of 10. I would say overall it was really good. There wasn't really much like secret identity really it wasn't easy to try to figure out who was at the table was on your side versus who wasn't based on card play, because you had to basically play all the cards in the deck, or at the very least run out of, because every turn you're drawing a card or you're playing a card. And so sometimes the cards you're playing doesn't really matter with whether you're a monster or a hero. You're just playing that card. Now, granted, you are playing the card on other people's piles a lot and playing your own piles. So there is a little bit of an element of like, oh, I see. Okay, he's playing a lot of monster cards in front of him. So most likely that player is a monster player. Or that other player over there is playing a lot of hero cards on me. So I feel like maybe they're either playing as heroes or they're monsters. So really, there's not an easy way to deduce who the other players are, since you have to pretty much go through the whole deck. And a lot of times it just felt like, for example, I'm the monster player. All I have is hero cards in my hand. So I have to play a hero card, but where do I play it? Do I play it somewhere where ultimately I can discard it if I get a discard card? Or am I going to play it somewhere where I think it's a monster player, they're not going to take advantage of it? But at the same time, you basically add up all the piles, and at the end of the game, you tally up who gets what. So really, the only part of the game that I feel like had a little bit of strategy was when you're trying to get heroes or monsters in your pile to get the extra points at the end, which wasn't always viable because somebody else might have that card and not play it, or they might play it, but you don't have a way to steal it. So overall, I gave it a 7 out of 10. The artwork on the cards are really, really nice. The cards feel like they're pretty good stock. And for a light filler game that you want to play, just like whether, if you have a group of friends or you have a lot of people over and you want to quickly bust out a game for about 20 minutes, and while you're waiting for another game to be set up or some more people to show up, this game I felt worked really well. But I gave it a 7 instead of like 8 or 9 because overall it felt like it was more random than really strategic or like a take that game. So that's my review of Monsters vs. Heroes Cthulhu Mythos Edition. Does this game belong on your shelf? Well, that's a really tricky one with this particular title because there's a lot of card games out there that I feel are better, like Stay Away, which fits up to a lot of players. There's also some simpler games like 1 Week Werewolf or just Werewolf in general that can play with a large group of people, and like 1 Week Ultimate Werewolf, for example, or 1 Week Vampire, or whatever version you want to get out of that series, plays very quickly. It's fun, and it can fit a large number of players. And then there's better hidden identity games like Secret Hitler, or there's a vampire one that I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it's by Fantasy Flight Games. There's Shadow Hunters. So overall, there's a lot of better games out there that I think deserve to be on your shelf more than this one. If you're a big fan of all things Cthulhu, like I am, and you really need to have a large collection of Cthulhu-related games, then yeah, this would belong on your shelf. But if you're looking for something that is a good filler, that is a lot of fun, and can fit 4 to 8 players, there are better games that I would recommend than this one. So overall, if you've liked the game and it sounds fun to you and it sounds interesting and you're curious about it, or you have other ones in the series, then sure, then absolutely go out and buy this game. But if that game didn't sound that exciting to you, or you have the aforementioned better games in your library for hidden identity, or even just a simple card game that you can play in 20 minutes with a large number of players, then I would say this does not belong on your shelf. Thank you, and have a great day.